What Christ is offering us here is true Christianity. I think a prophet is a person who has vision. Hi everyone, Angelo here. It's the 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. So before I get into today's reflection, as usual whenever this happens, I would like to draw your attention to US Catholic Magazine's YouTube channel, where once again they gave me an opportunity to do a reflection with them. And as always, I appreciate it so much. I can't put into words how much I appreciate being able to work alongside them. So I would appreciate if you go show them some love and hear what I have to say over there. So we left John. We're no longer in the Bread of Life discourse, and we are in chapter 7 now of Mark. So we have, I wouldn't call it an altercation, but there's definitely some tension between Jesus and the officials of his religion, the Pharisees and the scribes, who would have come from Jerusalem. And they come to him and they ask him, why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders? And then Jesus turns around and says, it's all the Isaiah was talking about, you all is the ones who hear about this fake religion and giving God lip service. Your worship is not really worship, is not meaningful. And then he draws everyone's attention and he's like, look, all of you could hear me, listen and understand. Nothing that goes into a person from the outside could make them unclean. But it's the things from in here, that's the kind of stuff could make you unclean. Now, I was listening to, I believe it was a Timothy Radcliffe video recently, but what I would have heard recently is that it is said that the Holy Spirit is the conversation between the Father and the Son. And every word Christ speaks is life, and every word brings new life. And a lot happened in this gospel here today, and a lot was said in this gospel here, which means I have a lot to say. So here's what all of it sounds like to me. The first point that I would like to note is that as much as Christ seems to start off hostile here, especially towards who we consider to be his antagonists, I do believe this story shows more Jesus' hospitality than anything else. Especially because it seems like, at least in the Gospels, the way they are written, there are historical or contextual reasons as to why Jesus and his disciples would seem so opposed to the religious officials. But the reason I say that it shows his hospitality is because it seems like they were all having a meal together. Or at least that's how I imagine the religious officials being able to make this observation. Either that or they're just macocious. But for this reflection, I will quicker go with they were all sharing meals together. And the reason I lead more towards that is because, like I would have mentioned in at least one previous video, I do believe that Jesus and the officials of his religion, people like the Pharisees and the scribes and them, I believe they knew each other well. And my theory is that Jesus would have worked closely alongside them before he would have started his own ministry at some point in his earlier years. So I imagine when they're around, he would have extended his hospitality towards them. And I also imagine that they would have accepted, hence they're able to make this observation here. So they raise their objections to Jesus' operations. And he turns around and he calls them out on their foolishness. Now keep in mind, these are educated people, right? But educated people could still do some foolish things. I would know. I am educated. And I could still do some damn foolishness when I'm ready. But because the thing is here, it doesn't seem like this would have been a written law. Especially because, like it said here in the gospel, the tradition of the elders. So this seemed to be something more that developed within the tradition over time. And of course, developments in our tradition aren't bad, obviously, right? But it's also not kosher to try to use tradition to then shame people, which is what Jesus is defending his people against here today. So it's like popular piety, for example. I think popular piety is super important. But we also shouldn't let what is important to us take precedence over what is important to God. So the question now comes, right? What is important to God? And I think a good place to start is with what Christ would have listed out here at the end of the gospel. Because these things, they take us away from God in the sense that they easily harm the body of Christ. They easily harm the people of God. So I think it's an invitation to leave behind enslavement to selfishness and ego and be emancipated into God's freedom. What Jesus is offering us here is true religion. What Christ is offering us here is true Christianity. It's about dying to self and rising with Christ. It's about living our lives in a radical and meaningful way. It's about love, ultimately. Because remember, what God gives us is life, and life meant to live. And the best way, at least I think, to live that life that we have is to live in union with God. But living in union with God might mean something different for you than it would for me. So however it means to live in union with God, only you could discern that. And when you discern that, which is a constant discerning process, but through discerning that, that's one of the best ways, I think, if not the best way, to live our lives. So it starts with your relationship with our Creator. It's about being grateful for this gift of life that we do have, this gift of time that we have, this gift of God's Spirit. When we waste our time, we're taking God for granted. But when we spend time in contemplation and when we contemplate this unconditional love that we're so graciously gifted, we are being intentional and meaningful with our lives. And we all have so much to give thanks for. And I genuinely believe that if we have the privilege to watch or listen to YouTube, we have a whole lot more to be grateful for as well. But speaking of things like YouTube and other social media, apparently the current trend, hate it or love it, is to be very demure and very mindful, which comes from, I'm not sure how to say her name, but I believe is Jules LeBron. And I mean, I'm all about that, mainly because I think the trend could invite some deeper reflection. And if people, young people especially, are entering into introspection, I'm all about that. At the same time though, what I would like to see coming out of our own religious and our own communal reflection and our own introspection is for us to come with the same energy that Jesus is coming with here in this story today. So in addition to this viral phrase about being very demure and very mindful, God alone knows why it took off, but it did. So in addition to this mindful phrase of being very demure and very mindful, I'd also like to see us demur our own faith and reject what's fake and embrace what's real. I think that's what Christ is inviting us here to today. Instead of studying who following what practices, let's start being honest with our own selves about what's meaningful and what isn't in our lives. Especially because, well, to me at least, the best way to cleanse your hands, like they're talking about here today, is to get them dirty by serving others. Like how Jesus would have washed his disciples' feet at the Last Supper. Wash your hands still though, because I don't think any of we could go through that COVID thing again. I definitely can't go through that COVID thing again. But I wish parts of this chapter wasn't left out in today's reading. Because if we look at the verses here, it's like chapter 7, but it's like 1 to 8, and then we skip, and then we read 14 to 15, skip, and then we read 21 to 23. And I wish those parts of this chapter wasn't left out of today's reading, because I feel like it really drives home what Christ is saying. Like if I had to try to hear this story in today's language, I think it would sound something like Jesus saying, okay, you go to confession week after week in order to be in a state of grace, whatever that means. to receive me. Yet, you don't allow me to transform you because you choose to remain stuck in your ways. And as we know, when you encounter Christ, you move different. Like you move like how he is here in this story today. And it's not that you become perfect or you lose your flaws or anything like that. But you love in a way that only God can love. And that's what our faith is meant to be about. Not about checking some boxes or trying to earn some spiritual points. I think what we're called to do is take a look at our situation for what it is and to see the world through the lens of grace. Because that grace is what brings about meaningful change through each of us. So it's important for us to know our stories, because our stories are meaningful and our stories matter. So as Trinbagonians, as Caribbean people, as people of faith, our stories matter. And we're at a point in history where we need to be active agents in charting our own way forward. And I don't mean no coat to arms. And I mean, everybody has an opinion, as they should. It is important. And as I'm sure many of us know, there is this viral interview going around with Jason Gordon on this topic where he says, well, that, okay, yeah, I hear the argument, and yeah, but we also have so much people suffering. And to be honest, I agree 100% with everything Demur said in that interview. I mean, we have so much poverty here in Trinidad and Tobago alone, far less for the wider Caribbean and throughout the world. And we want to study three ships, and leading up to elections too, on top of that. It's like we're trying to remain enslaved, mentally at least. And like everything else, it is important. I do agree that it is important. I believe it's important. But my question is it important right now? And I hear the counter argument of, okay, if not now, when? I get that. But I would have to side with the fact that I don't know if we should be focusing on a rebrand of the country when we have so much vulnerable and marginalized suffering the way people currently are. We're prophetic people in the Caribbean, and a prophet isn't a person who predicts the future. I mean, sure, they will have visions and all that, but I don't think a prophet is necessarily a person who has visions and could tell the future. I think a prophet is a person who has vision, a person who can see the good in the bad, a person who can see the extraordinary in the ordinary, a person can see the way things are, and out of that see the way things should be. And with all of that, they advocate for change. So let's take a look at our faith for what it is, and let's take a look at our world for what it is, seeing things through our own eyes, and allowing our own authentic experiences to guide and inform us. Because our story matters, and it is important. Everyone has a unique and individual story, and it matters and it is invaluable, especially to God. So let's take a look at the real situation and bring about goodness and change in our world. And it starts with making our relationship with God the most fundamental and the most integrated part of our story. And when we do that, inevitably, we will change the world. Anyways, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.